As the Alec Baldwin of the Beyond Your Wildest Genes show, Robb Wolf.
I don't know if I have enough hair to qualify for that. I'll do what I can.
Well, we try to go out into the world and spread what we think is really important and what we love doing. I love talking to you. You are a font of information, and you started something brand new, and I haven't seen it done much before, and I've got to tell you, as part of the Healthy Rebellion community, I love what you've done. It is you are super active as the host, and I deeply appreciate that, and not just opinion, but backed by facts. So I really want to dive into the whys of why you did this after the, 10 years of the Paleo solution?
Yeah. It's interesting. So we've been in this scene a long time. So my wife and I co-founded the first and fourth CrossFit affiliate gyms in the world, and kind of helped the whole CrossFit scene, do what it's done. And then we were very early in the paleo diet scene. And so, when CrossFit first hit the interwebs, they started posting daily content. And this was something so entirely novel and new. Prior to this, web pages were pretty static. Like whatever the content was, that was it. And it was before WordPress. And so updating things, you needed to be computer engineer practically to get anything done. So things tended to be fairly static, and they had figured out a way to, post some updated daily content, which included a workout of the day. And this was effectively the beginning of blogging, like before there was even a term for blogging.
Sure.
And we saw the world motor forward. Google became this indispensable tool, and it provided democratization to information access at a minimum, and also provided an opportunity for people who maybe weren't sometimes formally trained, sometimes not formally trained, like an engineer who took an interest in type 1 diabetes might go real deep on it and come up with some very different conclusions than people trained in a classical medical setting. And, it was pretty interesting and honestly pretty liberating and exciting. But I gotta say, maybe as far back as 2010, I want to say, which is when I launched my first book and the first podcast. One morning, I had some messages from Chris Kresser and Mark Sisson, and I was like, that's weird. I talk to those guys regularly, but it was very strange that I had late night messages from both of them. And they said, hey, have you noticed that your site traffic has dropped off? And we started poking around, and what this was kind of the beginning of what has been a multi-iteration story where Google has really endeavored to own the health, wellness, medical space. Like they kind of want to own the real estate there. And there have been multiple iterations where we would tweak and algorithmically, placate these guys, and then your site traffic would go back up. And if you had something to sell, you could sell it and, in theory, help people as a consequence of that. But around March or April of 2019, both on Facebook and our website, we noticed this just precipitous drop in sales and traffic. And then a couple of news pieces popped up that there had been an algorithmic update, and a whole host of kind of low carb, ancestral health related sites had seen up to a 97% haircut in their traffic due to the algorithm updates. And some of this stuff, it's really interesting. Like some of it's pretty extreme kind of anti-vaccine stuff, and I know that that's just a hot button topic. Like if you picked abortion and political parties, like you maybe couldn't get more hot button stuff. But there were some sites that even for me, like and this is going to anger people right out of the gate, but I'm vaccination cautious. Like, I think that they are amazing tools. I think that they get overused in some cases, and in others, we don't fully vet out the cost benefit story very well. But I'm in this kind of middle ground where I don't see conspiracies around every corner, but at the same time, I see some real lack of transparency and honesty and stuff like that. So some concerning features. But what was interesting is there were some very extreme folks that were given this haircut, and then there was a whole nesting of other folks that, and clearly self-interest. I was, in that group. So clearly I'm going to say that it was unfair,
Sure.
not right, and all that stuff. But, there was just kind of a basic reality that our ability on one day, someone searching for information about the vegan film, What the Health, if they put What the Health into a search engine, the third or fourth return on the front page would have been a massive review that I did, where I went literally line by line through this 2-hour film and said, here's the person, here's what they claimed, here's the material they used to support it, and here's my take on that. And I mean, it was a massive amount of work, and it was a very high traffic page that I had, one of many, many pages that were, number one search returns, because I had really put a ton of effort into, in theory, trying to do good work. Mm-hmm. And then the next day, if you search for What the Health, the same page showed up on page 35, page 40. And we were given all kinds of ridiculous commentary that, you just need to do some better, website SEO optimization and stuff like that. And it's kind of like, how does an algorithmic tweak take something that had been number 1 page and stick it on number 40 page? Like that seems kind of odd. But we were really faced with a decision. Do we keep motoring forward? And if so, in what medium do we do that? Because all of these information monopolies, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, they've really established a history of censorship, for lack of a better term. And I know that people get kind of prickly around that, where they will say, they're a private business, they can do what they want. And I'm of the opinion that these entities have been kind of straddling both sides of a very clear fence. Like, mm-hmm. if you run a business and you have people, doing something that looks like your business, and you're selling elements of that, there's a really clear distinction between a franchise and an affiliate. And I mean, it's crystal clear stuff, and you can get on the bad side of the government very quickly by claiming to be an affiliate but actually doing franchise type things. And similarly, there's a very clear distinction between being a platform and a publisher. And the thing is in the recesses of history, things like the telephone company have been given a pass with regards to litigation. If somebody uses a phone or the phone system to organize a terrorist attack, that's not necessarily the fault of the phone system, because it's a service effectively. And right. So some of this has been applied to other media outlets, but what the reality is that when you get into the game of deciding what is true and what is not true, you are a publisher. You're no longer just a platform. But Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, they've done a very masterful job of kind of straddling both sides of that and using the perks and privileges of each distinction kind of to their benefit. And they are very smart people, very powerful people, but in my opinion, they've developed some remarkable hubris in that because they're smart and because they're powerful, they've assumed that they are right about everything. And they've kind of woven a socio-political kind of agenda into the mix, which includes kind of a vegan diet and a very specific take on climate change and what have you. So it was a pretty big deal. I mean, I effectively woke up one day and realized that my work was of sufficient magnitude or however you want to label it, that these information monopolies had decided to try to make it disappear from the interwebs, make it very, very difficult to find. And so Nikki and I kind of had a conversation. Is this where we hang a gone fishing sign and we do something else, or do we, double down and try to circumvent this process? And we went for the latter, and we ended up on a platform called Mighty Networks. And the woman who founded Mighty Networks, Gina Bianchini, she's been pretty outspoken about, being respectful of private information and folks having the ability to generate and curate the information that they want and not having kind of a Orwellian censorship type process. So we opted for going on to that platform, and we opted for a paid membership site because our sense was that the easy access and anonymity of social media platforms did not bode well for people comporting themselves with any type of decency or friendliness. And if there was a dispute to be had, maintaining some civility there. So there was a hope that a paywall would keep out the riffraff. And I've been working on a medical risk assessment program for the better part of 10 years, where we identified some very high risk police and firefighters, high risk for type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. We got these folks on a lowish carb paleo type diet about 8 years ago, and the changes that these folks experienced were so profound that the very conservative estimates were that the pilot study saved the city of Reno about $22 million with a 33-to-1 return on investment. And so I've been working to scale this for quite some time, and I kind of saw an opportunity at this juncture to really throw some gasoline on that concept. And so when we were contemplating what we would call this whole thing and what the kind of mission was, we were at a conference, and somebody had mentioned a Camus, Albert Camus quote, and I'm going to totally butcher it, but it was something like, in an unfree world, your only way to be truly free is to make your very existence an act of rebellion. And I kind of put a spin on that, and it was, in an unhealthy world, the only way to be truly healthy is to make your very existence an act of rebellion. And so we called this thing the Healthy Rebellion. And we have a goal of liberating 1 million people out of the sick care system. And we have a 3-point element to that. The first point is we need to identify folks and establish what their metabolic health is. Hopefully it's good, but whether it's good or needs improvement, the second part of this story is that folks need access to well-trained functional medicine, integrative medicine practitioners and health coaches, because we don't affect diet and lifestyle change in a vacuum. We have to have support. We have to have good guidance. And then the third piece is probably the most controversial piece, but I honestly think possibly the most important piece, which is trying to get people out of the third-party payer system. And so I've been looking very closely at the creation of a MediShare. MediShares have historically been these entities that exist within religious organizations. And about 60 years ago, there were some exemptions created for religious entities to create health shares, where everybody pays into a pool. They delineate what is covered and what is not covered. And by the legal definition of the law, it's not insurance, although it looks a hell of a lot like insurance to me. But that's a legal distinction there. But these things have functioned really well. And what's interesting about them is they allow for some inclusion-exclusion criteria, which allows for some aligning of incentives. Healthier people will pay less, and less healthy people will pay more, or they may not be allowed to be part of the system. And so we've been motoring forward on that, and I think, as you alluded at the outset, we closed up the original Paleo Solution podcast, which ran for 10 years, had 440 some odd episodes, and we founded the Healthy Rebellion Radio.